When I was 5, my mom burned my grilled cheese and I started crying. So my dad punched her in the face and made me his surveillance camera, forcing me to report every mistake she made or he'd beat me too. For 13 years, he tracked my every movement with apps while mom coughed up blood until my English teacher found the bruises he'd hidden under my long sleeves and called CPS with photos that finally got him arrested. My mom burned my favorite grilled cheese when I was only 5. I was only a kid, so I did what every kid would do and I started crying really loudly. That's when I heard my father's massive footsteps slamming down the stairs. My mom immediately cowered and her eyes started to water. She covered my mouth begging me to stop. I was so confused why my mom of all people was afraid. That scared me more, so I screamed and cried louder. From behind me I heard, "Go to your room, son." It was my dad, and his breath reeked of cigarettes and Heineken. As soon as I shut the door behind me, I heard the yelling, "I married your Saria, and you can't even cook our son an effing meal." My blood turned cold, and that's when I heard it. It sounded like my mom had collapsed to the floor. I instinctively ran out to check on her, and that's when I saw the area around her eye had completely swelled up. I fell to my knees to hug her and comfort her, but that's when my dad spoke. "Son, don't comfort this W word. She got what she deserved." I tried to ignore him and keep going, but stopped when he eventually started threatening to hit me too. From there, my dad encouraged me to tell on my mom every day. Any spot in the house that was left unclean, anytime she was late picking me up. He told me it was to help her be better, and that it was the best thing for the family. But when that didn't work, he started wailing on me whenever I didn't tell him. That's how most of my childhood was spent being a surveillance camera. And sometimes I told my mom I would keep her mistakes a secret, but she would get really mad. "No, do what your father tells you," she said, her voice assertive and stern. So for years I assumed that it was just a normal part of family life, that abuse was just a part of life. One day I was at my friend's house and his parents were eating with us in the kitchen. He was the first friend I had made where both the parents were still together, so I sort of felt like we understood each other, until I bit into the hamburger that his mom had cooked, because I noticed the bun had been pretty badly over toasted. "This is burnt," I exclaimed out of instinct. I expected his dad to stand up and throw his mom across the room, or at least slap her across the face. Instead, he just laughed. "She's always doing that." My friend nodded, and the mom smiled while jokingly burying her face in her hands. Meanwhile, I was super tense, waiting for the ball to drop, except it never came. And when I left, both his parents kissed me goodbye. As I walked home, my head was spinning. And when I entered the door, it was like I had stepped into another world, one far, far away from the home I had just been in. Because my mom was curled up on the marble floor, with red on her forehead, crying her eyes out. I could hear my dad snoring upstairs, so I went over to her. She tried to push me away, but I told her to shut up while I treated her wounds. "I'm sorry for not being there for you, Mom. I love you." In response, she didn't say anything, just gripped onto my arms super tight and nodded her head through the tears. The next day, I was done. I woke up ready to betray my parents in the worst way possible. As soon as school ended, I didn't go home. I went to the police station. I wasn't sure about the procedures and stuff, so I just blurted out everything in one go. The violence, the manipulation, the emotional abuse. The woman looked really concerned and told me she would get a social worker to do an emergency home visit. After an hour of waiting, the social worker showed up to the police station and told me she would come to my house that evening. She told me that it is extremely likely that my parents would figure out it was me. That made my heart skip a hit, but this was followed by a promise that right after the home visit, she would help with an emergency rehousing for me and my mom. I was so grateful that I couldn't help but give her a hug, and I went home with a smile on my face. And as promised, at 9 p.m., there was a knock on the door. My mom opened it, expecting it to be a family member. Immediately, the social worker was faced with a woman covered in bruises and a black eye. I watched this all from the corner of the room. When she figured out what was going on, my mom's face went ghost white, and she immediately called my dad. I don't know what else was said, but in just minutes, the social worker apologized for bothering us and left. I knew my dad had tricked her. I tried to run up to my room, but it was too late. My dad heard my footsteps and grabbed me. "If you think what I did to your mother was bad, you should see how my dad taught me to treat snitches." Full story on channel, link below. I stood frozen in terror as his grip tightened around my arm. The familiar smell of cigarettes and beer filled my nostrils as he dragged me toward the stairs. My mom scrambled to her feet behind us, her bruised face contorted with panic. She reached out toward us, but then pulled her hand back, knowing better than to interfere. My father's footsteps thundered up each step while I stumbled behind him, my legs barely keeping up. The hallway seemed to stretch forever as we approached my room. He shoved me inside and slammed the door so hard that my baseball trophies rattled on the shelf. Through the thin walls, I heard him stomping back downstairs. My mom's whimpers grew louder, followed by the sound of furniture scraping across the floor. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The next morning came too soon. I woke up with dried tears on my face and my arm throbbing where he had grabbed me. Sunlight streamed through my window, but it felt cold and unwelcoming. I crept to my door and listened carefully. The house was quiet, which usually meant Dad had left for work. I found my mom in the kitchen, moving slowly as she prepared breakfast. Fresh bruises covered her arms and she winced with every movement. When she saw me, she turned away quickly, but not before I caught sight of the swelling on her jaw. School that day felt like walking through a fog. My teacher's voices sounded distant and muffled. During lunch, I sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, pushing food around my tray without eating. My friend Nicholas tried to sit with me, but I waved him away. How could I explain what was happening when I barely understood it myself? The walk home took longer than usual. My feet dragged with each step, and I found myself taking detours through the park, past the library, anywhere to delay the inevitable return. But eventually, I ran out of places to go. As I approached our house, I noticed my father's car in the driveway. My stomach dropped. He never came home early unless something was wrong. I considered running, but where would I go? The social worker had failed us. The police hadn't helped. We were alone. I entered through the back door as quietly as possible. The house felt different, charged with an electric tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. From the living room, I heard my father's voice low and menacing. He was talking to someone on the phone. I crept closer, staying hidden behind the wall. His words became clearer. He was talking to his brother, my Uncle Klaus, about teaching someone a lesson, about making sure they never interfered with his family again. My blood ran cold as I realized he was talking about the social worker. My mom sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like she was trying to disappear into the cushions. When my father hung up the phone, he turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The next few days passed in a blur of fear and tension. My father watched me constantly, his eyes following my every move. He made me sit with him after dinner, asking detailed questions about my day, about who I talked to, what I did. I kept my answers short and careful, terrified of saying the wrong thing. At school, I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. How other kids talked about their weekends with their families, trips to the movies, barbecues in the backyard, simple normal things that felt like glimpses into an alien world. My friend Nicholas invited me over again, but I made excuses. I couldn't bear to see his happy family again, knowing what waited for me at home. One afternoon, I came home to find my mom packing a suitcase. Hope flared in my chest. Were we finally leaving? But when she saw me, she quickly shoved the suitcase under the bed and put her finger to her lips. My father was in the garage, she whispered, working on his car. She had been planning something, but she needed more time. That night at dinner, my father seemed different, calmer, almost cheerful. He complimented my mom's cooking, something he never did. He asked about my homework, nodding approvingly when I told him about my math test. The normalcy of it all felt more terrifying than his usual anger. After I went to bed, I heard them talking in hushed tones. My mom's voice sounded pleading, desperate. My father's responses were short and sharp, and silence. I lay awake for hours, straining to hear any sound, any sign of what was happening. The pattern continued for weeks, days of walking on eggshells, nights of muffled arguments and mysterious sounds. My mom's bruises faded to yellow and green, only to be replaced by fresh purple ones. She stopped looking me in the eye, stopped speaking unless spoken to first. I started keeping a journal hidden under my mattress, documenting everything. The dates, the injuries, the threats. Maybe someday it would matter. Maybe someday someone would listen. But for now, it was just my secret, my small act of rebellion against the nightmare we were living. There's something odd about how the social worker just walked away after seeing the mother's bruises. What kind of conversation could have made her leave so quickly? The boy mentions his dad tricked her, but I'm really curious what exactly was said to make an official ignore such obvious signs of abuse right in front of her. One evening, my father announced we were having a family meeting. My mom and I exchanged worried glances as we gathered in the living room. He stood before us like a judge delivering a verdict, explaining new rules for the household. No phone calls without his permission, no visitors, no leaving the house except for school and errands. Any violation would have consequences. The walls of our prison were closing in, and I realized with growing horror that the failed social worker visit had only made things worse. We were more trapped than ever, and my father was making sure we knew it. The new rules transformed our house into a into a fortress of fear. My father installed locks on the phone, removed the computer from my room, and started checking my backpack every morning before school. He made me write down the names of everyone I talked to during the day, demanding details about every conversation. My mom moved through the house like a ghost, her movements calculated to avoid making any sound that might draw his attention. School became my only escape, but even there, the weight of our secret pressed down on me. Teachers started noticing my declining grades and exhaustion. Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside after English class, concern etched across her face. I mumbled excuses about staying up late studying, but her eyes told me she wasn't convinced. She handed me a slip of paper with the school counselor's office hours. I crumpled it in my pocket the moment I left her classroom. Nicholas approached me during lunch again, this time refusing to take no for an answer. He sat down across from me, his sandwich untouched as he studied my face. I could see questions forming behind his eyes, but I looked away, focusing on the scratches on the cafeteria table. He mentioned his parents were asking about me, wondering why I never came over anymore. The invitation hung in the air between us, but I shook my head and walked away, leaving him sitting there confused. The walk home that day stretched longer than usual. I found myself standing outside the public library, watching people come and go with their normal lives and normal problems. A mother struggled with her toddler who didn't want to leave. An elderly man dozed in a chair by the window. None of them knew what it was like to count your father's footsteps, to measure the danger and the silence between them. When I finally arrived home, I found my mom in the bathroom, dabbing makeup on a fresh bruise along her collarbone. She saw me in the mirror and quickly pulled her shirt higher, but we both knew I'd already seen it. I wanted to ask about the suitcase, about her plan, but the sound of my father's car in the driveway sent us both scurrying to our assigned roles. That night, my father introduced a new rule. We would eat dinner together as a family every night at exactly 6 o'clock, no exceptions. Anyone who was late would face consequences. He smiled as he said it, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. My mom nodded silently, her hands trembling as she served the pot roast. The following week brought a new horror. My father started picking me up from school randomly, appearing in the parking lot without warning. The first time, I was walking toward the bus when I heard his horn. My blood froze as I saw him leaning out the driver's window, gesturing for me to get in. Other kids stared as I climbed into the passenger seat, my legs feeling like lead. He drove in silence for several minutes before speaking. He'd been thinking about trust, he said, about how families needed to stick together, about how outsiders didn't understand our ways. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he talked, and I noticed fresh scratches on his hands. When we got home, my mom was kneeling on the kitchen floor, scrubbing at a stain that looked suspiciously like blood. Days blurred together in a haze of fear and vigilance. I perfected the art of moving silently through the house, avoiding the creaky floorboard outside my parents' room, timing my movements to coincide with the hum of the refrigerator or the rumble of passing cars. My mom and I developed a wordless communication system, slight gestures and glances that conveyed warnings and reassurances. One afternoon, I discovered my journal was missing. Panic clawed at my throat as I searched frantically under my mattress, behind my dresser, in every hiding spot I could think of. When my father called me downstairs for dinner, I knew. He sat at the head of the table with my journal open beside his plate, reading entries aloud in a mocking voice. My mom kept her eyes fixed on her food as he turned each page with deliberate slowness. After dinner, he burned it in the backyard. I watched through my bedroom window as months of documentation turned to ash, my small rebellion reduced to smoke that disappeared into the night sky. He looked up at my window when he was done and I quickly stepped back into the shadows, but I knew he'd see me watching. The next morning, I woke to find a new notebook on my desk with a note in my father's handwriting. Try again. The message was clear. He wanted me to know that nothing I did was secret. Nothing was beyond his reach. I shoved the notebook in my backpack, my hands shaking with rage and helplessness. At school, I started paying closer attention to the adults around me. Which teachers lingered in the hallways between classes? Which ones really looked at their students instead of through them? Mr. Rodriguez, the gym teacher, had kind eyes and always asked how we were doing. But when I opened my mouth to speak after class one day, the words wouldn't come. What if he was like the social worker? What if trying again only made things worse? Nicholas cornered me in the bathroom during fourth period. He blocked the door, his usually cheerful face serious and determined. He'd seen the bruises on my arms during gym class, he said. He'd noticed how I flinched when people moved too quickly. His older sister had a friend who went through something similar. He wanted to help. I pushed past him without a word, but his offer echoed in my mind throughout the day. Help. Such a simple word, but it felt as dangerous as a loaded weapon. That evening, I found my mom in the laundry room, holding one of my father's shirts. There were tears streaming down her face as she stared at a lipstick stain on the collar that wasn't her shade. The revelation shifted something in the house's atmosphere. My father's violence had always been predictable in its triggers, but now there was a new element of chaos. He came home later, smelling of perfume that made my mom's jaw clench. She said nothing, but I saw her fingers tighten on the dish towel until her knuckles went white. Klaus visited the following weekend. My uncle was a larger version of my father, with the same cold eyes and heavy hands. They spent hours in the garage, their voices low and conspiratorial. Through the kitchen window, I watched them loading boxes into Klaus's truck. My mom stayed in her room, claiming a headache, but I could hear her pacing back and forth above me. That night, I overheard fragments of a phone conversation. My father was in his study with the door closed, but his voice carried through the thin walls. Something about teaching lessons and making examples, about how respect had to be maintained, about how his father would have handled things. The old-fashioned phone in the hallway had been disconnected, but I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to catch every word. Monday brought a new development. A substitute teacher appeared in Mrs. Henderson's class, explaining that she had a family emergency and would be out indefinitely. My stomach churned as I remembered my father's phone call, his talk of teaching lessons. Had he done something to her because she'd shown concern for me? The substitute was young and nervous, clearly overwhelmed by our class. She didn't notice when I put my head down on my desk, fighting waves of guilt and fear. My mom's escape plan, whatever it had been, seemed to evaporate after Klaus's visit. The suitcase disappeared from under her bed, and she stopped whispering on the phone when my father was in the shower. Instead, she moved through her days with mechanical precision, cooking, cleaning, and avoiding eye contact with both of us. I started walking different routes home, varying my routine in small ways that my father might not notice. Sometimes I'd duck into the corner store and pretend to browse the candy aisle, watching through the window to see if his car was following. Other times I'd circle the block twice, doubling back on my own footsteps. These tiny acts of defiance felt both pointless and necessary, like scratching tallies on a prison wall. One afternoon, I found a note in my locker. Nicholas had written his phone number and a simple message: "Whenever you're ready." I stared at the paper for a long moment before tearing it into tiny pieces and flushing them down the toilet. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, but I memorized the number anyway, repeating it in my head like a prayer. The violence at home escalated in subtle ways. My father didn't need to hit us as often now. The threat was enough. He'd drum his fingers on the table in a specific rhythm that made my mom's hands shake. He'd stand too close when asking questions, his breath hot on our faces. He'd grip our shoulders just hard enough to leave marks that wouldn't show through clothes. I became an expert at reading his moods, cataloging the warning signs like a meteorologist tracking storms, the way his jaw clenched when he read the mail, the particular tilt of his head when he was about to explode, the false calm that preceded his worst rages. My mom and I moved in careful choreography around these danger signals, a dance of survival that left us exhausted and hollow. School picture day arrived with its forced smiles and artificial poses. I sat in front of the blue backdrop, the photographer telling me to think happy thoughts. Picture day with all this going on, the photographer saying think happy thoughts, while this kid's basically living in a maximum security house is like telling someone to smile while getting a root canal. Timing really isn't everything here, folks. The flash went off, capturing a boy who looked normal on the surface but whose eyes held secrets too heavy for his age. When the photos came back weeks later, my father would frame one and hang it in the living room, a prop in his performance of normal family life. The weather turned colder, and with it came new challenges. My father started insisting on driving us everywhere, claiming the roads were too dangerous for walking. This eliminated my small freedoms, my moments of solitude between school and home. My mom's errands were now supervised, my father accompanying her to the grocery store and sitting in the car while she shopped. I watched other families preparing for the holidays with a mixture of envy and confusion. Store windows displayed scenes of warmth and togetherness that felt like artifacts from an alien civilization. At school, kids complained about having to spend time with annoying relatives. I wanted to shake them, to make them understand how lucky they were to have relatives who were just annoying, not dangerous. Nicholas made one more attempt to reach out, catching me alone in the library during study hall. He slid into the seat next to me, speaking in whispers about how his sister's friend had gotten help, how there were people who understood, who could make things better. I let him talk, memorizing every word while shaking my head. When he finally gave up and left, I saw the hurt in his eyes, but it was safer than the alternative. That evening, I helped my mom prepare dinner while my father watched television in the next room. She moved stiffly, favoring her left side where fresh bruises bloomed beneath her sweater. As she stirred the soup, she spoke without looking at me, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me to be strong, to be smart, to survive. She said she was sorry for everything, for not protecting me better, for not being the mother I deserved. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that we were both victims, but my father's footsteps in the hallway cut our conversation short. We resumed our roles seamlessly, me setting the table while she ladled soup into bowls. My father entered the kitchen with a satisfied smile, commenting on how nice it was to have such a well-behaved family. After dinner, he announced another new rule. He'd be checking our homework every night, making sure we weren't writing anything inappropriate. My essays, my mom's grocery lists, even her recipe cards would need his approval. He presented this as concern for our education and efficiency, but we all knew it was another link in our chains. That night, I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of violence below, the crash of something breaking, my mom's stifled cry, my father's heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. I pulled my pillow over my head trying to block out the sounds, but they penetrated anyway, seeping into my dreams and turning them into nightmares. Morning came with its false normalcy. My mom served breakfast with a split lip that she tried to hide behind her coffee mug. My father read the newspaper as if nothing had happened, occasionally commenting on local news stories. I pushed eggs around my plate, my appetite gone, counting the minutes until I could escape to school, but escape was an illusion. Even at school, I carried the weight of our secret, the knowledge that I would have to return to that house, to him, at the end of the day. Teachers praised my quiet behavior, not recognizing it as a survival mechanism. Classmates avoided me, sensing the darkness I carried but not understanding its source. The cycle continued, each day blending into the next in a relentless pattern of fear and violence. My father's control tightened like a noose, cutting off any hope of outside help. My mom grew thinner, her eyes more hollow, her movements more mechanical, and I existed in the space between childhood and something else, something harder and more broken. One particularly bad night, after my father had passed out from drinking, my mom crept into my room. Her face was swollen, one eye completely shut. She sat on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair with trembling fingers. She whispered that she loved me, that she was proud of me, that someday things would be different. I wanted to believe her, but the words felt as fragile as spider silk, ready to dissolve at the slightest touch. The next morning, she moved even more slowly than usual, wincing with every step. My father watched her struggle with a satisfied expression, making comments about clumsy women who couldn't watch where they were going. I gripped my spoon so tightly it left marks on my palm, imagining what it would feel like to throw it at his head. At school, I found myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The boy looking back at me seemed older than my years, his eyes holding knowledge that no child should possess. I thought about Nicholas's offer, about the phone number I'd memorized, about Mrs. Henderson who'd tried to help before she disappeared, but fear kept me frozen, trapped between the danger I knew and the uncertainty of what might happen if I tried to escape it. The journal my father had given me remained empty, its blank pages mocking my inability to document our suffering. I carried it in my backpack like a weight, a reminder of his power and my helplessness. Sometimes I'd take it out during class, pen poised over paper, but the words wouldn't come. What was the point of writing what he already knew, what he had created? As winter deepened, our isolation became complete. No visitors came to the house. Phone calls were limited to my father's business associates. Mail was screened before we could see it. We existed in a bubble of his making, cut off from any possibility of rescue or intervention. The outside world continued on, unaware of the prison hidden behind our normal-looking suburban facade. The empty journal became my constant companion, a mockery of my father's control. Every morning he'd check it, flipping through blank pages with narrowed eyes. I'd watch him from across the kitchen table, my cereal growing soggy while he searched for evidence of rebellion that wasn't there. One morning, something shifted. My mom dropped a plate while washing dishes, and it shattered across the kitchen floor. We both froze, waiting for my father's reaction, but he just continued reading his newspaper, the silence more terrifying than any outburst. My mom's hands shook as she swept up the pieces, and I noticed she kept one sharp fragment, slipping it into her apron pocket when she thought no one was looking. That afternoon, Nicholas intercepted me outside the school library. He pressed a business card into my hand before I could protest. It was for a youth shelter downtown, with a 24-hour hotline number. I tried to give it back, but he'd already disappeared into the crowd of students. I stood there holding the card, feeling its edges dig into my palm. The walk home revealed a new development. My father's car sat in the driveway next to an unfamiliar sedan. Through the living room window, I could see him talking with a woman I didn't recognize. She wore professional clothes and carried a briefcase. My stomach churned as I entered through the back door, trying to avoid whatever was happening. My mom stood in the kitchen, her face pale. She gestured for me to come closer, then whispered that the woman was from Child Protective Services. Someone had called in another report. My father was handling it, she said, her voice flat and resigned. I thought of Nicholas and the business card still in my pocket. The woman left after 20 minutes. My father saw her to the door, all smiles and handshakes. When he turned back to us, his expression transformed. He didn't speak, just stood there studying us with calculating eyes. The silence stretched until my mom started preparing dinner with trembling hands. That night I discovered my backpack had been searched. Everything was slightly out of place, notebooks shifted, pens scattered. The business card was gone. I lay in bed, listening to my parents' muffled voices downstairs, trying to decode the rise and fall of their conversation. School became a minefield. My father started showing up randomly, chatting with teachers in the hallway, volunteering for parent activities. Other kids thought I was lucky to have such an involved dad. They didn't see how his presence made my teachers nervous, how conversations died when he approached, how even the principal seemed eager to end their interactions. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd taken over for Mrs. Henderson, tried to engage me in class, but with my father's shadow looming over the school, I kept my head down and my answers short. She'd give me concerned looks, but what could she do? My father had made himself a fixture, untouchable and ever-present. The weather turned bitter cold, and with it came new restrictions. My father installed a security system, claiming it was for our protection. Motion sensors in every room, cameras at the doors. He showed us how to arm and disarm it, but only he knew the master code. We were being monitored even when he wasn't home. My mom's movements became even more restricted. The grocery store trips stopped entirely. My father now handled all shopping. She wasn't allowed to answer the door or the phone. I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table for hours, staring at nothing, the sharp piece of plate still hidden in her apron pocket. One evening, Klaus returned. He and my father spent hours in the garage while my mom and I prepared dinner in silence. Through the window, I watched them unload tools from Klaus's truck. When they finally came inside, they smelled of motor oil and something else, something that made my skin crawl. At dinner, Klaus studied me with the same cold eyes as my father. He asked about school, about my friends, about whether I'd been behaving. Each question felt like a trap. My father watched our interaction with satisfaction, occasionally nodding when I gave the right answers. The way she kept that sharp piece of the broken plate makes me wonder what she's planning to do with it. How does the security system know who's moving around? After Klaus left, my father announced we'd be taking a family trip. Just a weekend away, he said, to reconnect and spend quality time together. My mom's fork clattered against her plate. We both knew what this meant. Isolation somewhere even more complete, where no one could hear us. The next day at school, I felt time running out. Nicholas found me during lunch, his face serious. He knew about my father's visits to school, about the way teachers now avoided me. He pressed another note into my hand, this one with an address. His sister's friend, he explained quickly. She got out, she could help. I memorized the address before destroying the note in the bathroom, but when I emerged, my father stood in the hallway, chatting with the vice principal. His eyes found mine immediately, and I knew he'd been waiting. The drive home was silent, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. That night, I heard my parents in their room. My father's voice was calm, methodical, discussing the trip details. My mom's responses were barely audible. I crept to their door, pressing my ear against the wood. He was describing a cabin in the mountains. No neighbors for miles, no cell phone service. Perfect for family bonding, he said. The next morning, my mom moved like a ghost through her routines. While my father showered, she slipped into my room. Her face was drawn, but her eyes held a determination I hadn't seen before. She pressed something into my hand, the sharp piece of plate wrapped in cloth. For emergencies, she mouthed silently. At school, I made a decision. During gym class, while changing in the locker room, I showed Mr. Rodriguez the bruises on my arms and back. His face went pale. I told him about the cabin, about the trip planned for that weekend. He immediately took me to the principal's office. The principal called the police while Mr. Rodriguez stayed with me. I sat in the office, watching the o'clock, knowing my father would arrive soon for his daily visit. Sure enough, his car pulled into the parking lot just as the police cruiser arrived. I watched through the window as he saw the police car and his expression changed. He didn't run. He walked calmly into the school, his face a mask of concern. When he saw me in the principal's office with the police, he played the worried father perfectly. There must be some misunderstanding, he said. His son had been troubled lately, making up stories. The officer seemed uncertain, glancing between us. But then Mr. Rodriguez spoke up. He documented everything. My declining grades, my isolation, the fear in my eyes. Other teachers came forward, admitting they'd noticed things too, but hadn't known what to do. Mrs. Henderson had left notes before her sudden departure, concerns about my welfare. The evidence mounted while my father's mask began to crack. They took him for questioning. I watched from the window as they put him in the police car, his eyes finding mine with a look that promised this wasn't over. A social worker arrived to take me home, where we found my mom sitting at the kitchen table, still as a statue. The social worker explained that my father would be held while they investigated. My mom listened without expression, her hands folded in her lap. When asked about her injuries, she remained silent. But when the social worker mentioned emergency housing, something flickered in her eyes. That night, we packed quickly. Only essentials, the social worker said. My mom moved with sudden energy, gathering clothes and documents. I noticed her pause at their bedroom door, then walk away without looking back. We left the house with 2 suitcases and nothing else. The emergency shelter was a nondescript building downtown. Our room was small but clean, with 2 beds and a tiny window. My mom sat on her bed, looking around with wonder. It was the first time in years we'd been somewhere he couldn't reach us. She pulled me into a hug, both of us shaking with relief and fear. The next days blurred together. Police interviews, social worker meetings, paperwork that seemed endless. My mom slowly began to speak, telling her story in halting sentences. Each word seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders. I told my story too, about the years of surveillance, the violence, the control. Nicholas visited me at the shelter, bringing homework and news from school. My father had been released on bail, but wasn't allowed near us or the school. Klaus had been questioned too. The investigation was ongoing, but we were safe for now. Nicholas's sister's friend, the one who'd escaped her own situation, came to visit my mom, offering support and guidance. We learned about restraining orders, about legal aid, about starting over. My mom began attending support groups while I met with a counselor. It was strange talking to someone about everything that had happened. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush, years of silence finally breaking. The legal process moved forward. My father hired lawyers, of course. There would be hearings, trials, a long road ahead. But for the first time, we weren't facing it alone. We had advocates, support systems, people who believed us. The system that had failed us before was finally working. My mom found a job through a program at the shelter. It wasn't much, just part-time work at a grocery store, but it was hers. I watched her get ready for her first day, putting on the uniform with pride. She was different now, standing straighter, meeting people's eyes. The ghost was becoming a person again. I returned to school with support from counselors. The other kids whispered, but Nicholas and a few others formed a protective barrier around me. Teachers checked in regularly, making sure I was okay. It was overwhelming, but also comforting to know people were watching out for me instead of watching me for him. Weeks turned into months. We moved from the shelter to a small apartment, just the 2 of us. It was sparse but safe, with locks only we controlled. My mom decorated it slowly, adding small touches that made it home. I helped her hang curtains, both of us flinching at sudden noises but learning to relax. The court dates came and went. My father tried various tactics, claiming mental illness, blaming stress, even trying to turn it around on us. But the evidence was overwhelming. Teachers testified, police presented documentation, medical records showed years of injuries. His control was finally exposed for everyone to see. During one hearing, I saw him across the courtroom. He looked smaller somehow, just an angry man without his kingdom to rule. When our eyes met, I didn't look away. The fear was still there, might always be there, but it no longer controlled me. I had found my voice, and I had used it. My mom testified too, her voice steady as she recounted years of abuse. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, the judge's face grave. When she finished, she looked at me and smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen in years. We were doing this together, mother and son, finally on the same side. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on multiple counts. The sentence would come later, but for now, it was enough. My mom cried in the courthouse bathroom, not from sadness, but from relief. I held her hand as we walked out into the sunlight, free in a way we'd never been before. Back at our apartment, we made dinner together. Simple spaghetti, nothing fancy, but it tasted like freedom. We ate at our small table, talking about school, about our job, about normal things. The silence that followed wasn't heavy with fear, but comfortable, peaceful. We were learning how to be a family again, just the 2 of us. That night, I started a new journal, not for him to read, but for me. I wrote about the day, about the future, about hope. My mom knocked on my door, bringing hot chocolate. She sat on my bed, and we talked until late, making plans. College for me, maybe community college for her, dreams that finally seemed possible. The healing wasn't instant or easy. Nightmares came, triggers appeared unexpectedly. But we had help now, therapists who understood, support groups who'd been there. Each day got a little easier, each week a little brighter. We were building new lives from the ashes of the old. I reconnected with Nicholas properly, visiting his house without fear. His parents welcomed me warmly, understanding without prying. It was strange being in a normal home, but good strange. I was learning what family could be, should be. His mom even taught me to cook, laughing when I flinched at a burnt edge, and hugging me when I explained why. My mom blossomed in ways I never imagined. She made friends at work, joined a book club, even started taking art classes. I'd find her sketching at the kitchen table, humming softly. The woman who'd once moved in silence was finding her voice in countless ways. The anniversary of our escape passed quietly. We marked it with a small celebration, just the 2 of us. A cake from the grocery store, candles that spelled out new beginnings. We didn't talk about him or the past. Instead, we talked about our plans, our dreams, our future. The past was done. We were writing a new story now. School improved dramatically. My grades recovered, teachers praised my progress. I joined the drama club, finding power in taking on different roles and controlling narratives. Nicholas was there too, always supportive, the friend who'd never given up on me. When I got the lead in the spring play, my mom sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Graduation approached faster than expected. College acceptances arrived, scholarships based on my story of overcoming adversity. My mom helped me choose, weighing options we never thought we'd have. The future spread before us, full of possibility instead of fear. The day I graduated, my mom wore a new dress she'd bought herself. She took pictures with her phone, embarrassing me with her enthusiasm. Why does the father show up at school right when the narrator leaves the bathroom after destroying Nicholas's note? The timing feels too perfect to be coincidence. Makes me wonder if someone's been informing him about the boy's movements at school all along. But I didn't mind. Seeing her happy, truly happy, was worth any embarrassment. We'd survived together, and now we were thriving. That summer we took a real trip, not to an isolated cabin, but to the beach. We built sandcastles, collected shells, did all the things we'd missed during the dark years. Watching the sun set over the ocean, my mom took my hand. We didn't need words. We made it through the storm. College move-in day arrived with nervous excitement. My mom helped me set up my dorm room, fussing over every detail. When it was time for her to leave, we both cried a little. But they were good tears, normal tears. I was ready for this next chapter, and so was she. As I watched her drive away, I thought about how far we'd come. From that scared little boy crying over burnt grilled cheese to a young man heading to college. From a woman cowering in fear to one standing tall and proud. We'd broken the cycle, rewritten our story. The past would always be part of us, but it no longer defined us. We were survivors, yes, but more than that, we were free. Got it. Ready when you are. Just drop the outro commentary when you're ready for the transformation.